Hey everyone, great to see
Hey.
you.
Hi, Wigs and Health.
Hi,
Hi, happy you're
Eric
joining it.
Jillian.
Melissa, you look very beautiful, and Eric and I have just been noticing just the expansive smile. So nice to see you. So welcome everyone. Our Live and Love
Live and love.
is really starting to inspire these conversations. And I'm excited about this being the final week around this theme throughout May, being the nature of self-care. And I was just chatting with Cecilia and saying, it's interesting. We've explored, and always in a way from the position of a reconnective healing experience, but we've explored humor and self-care, and we've explored physicality and movement. We've explored, thank you, Dr. Eric, nutrition last week, which had some very interesting knowledge and facts, as well as it included spiritual nutrition, which is obviously a very interesting way to look at nutrition. And this week, decision-making. But one of the things that I'd like you to consider and ask yourself is, in and throughout this month, this theme on the nature of self-care, has it kind of come up for you in whether it's a thought or some aspect of it? Who is the self that I am caring for? We have very much established in a reconnective healing experience and awareness that there is this finite self, this body mind, this experiential projection of consciousness as consciousness, and there is our true nature, our true self. And we are always looking at this. So throughout this month, I'm just wondering if anybody kind of had to look at that, because this week and much of this week will carry into some very interactive ways in which you will be in breakout groups for the June 4th retreat, which will be on June 4th. And yes, it will apply to this month's theme. It's just we had Memorial Day in the United States, so it's been bumped a week. But decision-making is going to require us to investigate and explore self-care through the lens of both selves, all selves, both the finite self and our true nature, I am. And so this was not an easy way to bring this sort of final week through you and to you, because decision-making has been framed and served up to us in experience with a very strong edge, or I should say, press on the side of the finite self. Even to just Google the nature of decision-making, often it comes up as a noun. It's the action or process of making decisions, and especially important ones. It's explained as process, skill, model, a matrix, steps. It's regarded as a cognitive process resulting in the selection of a belief or a course of action among several possible alternative options that could either be rational or irrational. I'm serving you up the way in which we are taught about decision-making often. It refers to a process, again, in reasoning based on assumptions of values, preferences, beliefs of the decision maker. So there's an implication, the material view of self is that there's this separate decision maker. Every decision-making process produces a final choice This is part of the wiki definition, which may or may not prompt action. So we're going to throw in a little test here. Grab a little piece of paper or something to write with. We're going to and don't get too caught up because we're not going to spend a lot of time in this, but we want you
But we are going to check your spelling. I'm kidding.
That is humor for Jillian's true self. Quickly write down the first thing that comes up. Okay, I really want to reference that. Is if we were to ask you, what has been your best decision? Just write something down. What has been your best decision? Just don't. No, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to explore.
Whatever comes to mind, you don't have to wait and go, well, was this decision better than that? Your best immediate response to what's your best decision?
What has been your best decision? And then we want you to quickly capture in the same sort of inspirational way, what has been your worst decision? Just throw something down. What is a portal? It's a doorway to transformation.
It's an expansion of our online essentials, our level 1, an 8+ hour e-learning course.
The portal helps us discover our roadblocks that may be stopping us from living our fullest potential.
How does the portal help bring about these benefits? Easy to follow short segments with interactive exercises, information acquired not only through the mind, but through interaction with the frequencies themselves. It includes the 8 hours of the online essentials course.
2 key chapters, one on love and one on healing from the new series, The Inner Compass. It brings the possibility for instant transformation, healing, and the evolution of each and every one of us. Okay, and now I want you to look at what you wrote really kind of just intimately. And I want you to ask yourself this question, and you're going to write this down for each. In hindsight, because decision has been made, it could have been something today or your life, it doesn't matter. For either or both, do you think you used intuition or thinking without thinking? Let me repeat that. For each or both, best or worst decision, in hindsight, do you think for either or both, you used intuition or thinking without thinking? And just place it next to one or the other or both, or you could say, I don't know. Really, this isn't a test. We're going to explore this. And sometimes it's an interesting exercise to get the personality out of the way for a moment. And this can help with this because most decision-making for most of us is perceived to be obtained through thinking. Okay. This is, and the questions that we might ask, and you don't have to write anything down, is, I'm just going to throw this out there. Just receive. Do we believe the centerpiece of decision-making is created outside of the mind? Or are our thoughts directing us to make personal decisions? Just let that, don't have to have an answer. Do we think the centerpiece of decision-making, this is very personal, utterly intimate, is created outside of the mind? Or are our thoughts directing us to make personal decisions? Do we feel at times we are victims of random thoughts creating the world for us? And I will give these to Cecilia to put in our follow-up email, just this. Do we find ourselves in a state of a feeling or a thought that we're victim to thoughts creating the world for us? And then this is an important last consideration. We're just investigating. Do we believe that there is someone inside us who is choosing our thoughts? I love Barbara's laughing. I mean, I'm asking these questions. Please do laugh. This is very playful. Is there someone inside us who is choosing our thoughts? If so, what about involuntary thoughts? And what about conscious thinking? So I'm going to throw another little something at you. Think of the number 12. Do you think of the number 12? I asked you to think of the number 12. Are you able to think of the number 12? Yes? Okay, now think of the number 13 or 14, right? You can think of the number 13 or 14. So if we can do this, then technically, if I were to say to you, only think happy thoughts, you could do that, right? You could do that. Technically speaking, yes? Only have happy thoughts. You could do this. So I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to suggest strongly, first of all, no, there is not a person in us choosing one thought over another. We obviously don't come up with every thought we have. And we should probably question that very seriously. All thinking does appear in our mind, but our minds have been conditioned by our families and parents and culture. And so not all of our thoughts have a personal origin, right? We inherit thoughts. Katerina is laughing. Good. This is an important entry into this concept of decision making. I'm glad I'm entertaining you. Yay, I was worried it was going to be a little too heavy, but it isn't. So
I know when Katerina is enjoying herself here, because not only does she get that amazing smile on her face, but your whole self comes to it. Katerina goes up and down, and I see the whole movement. You're delightful.
So if we inherit our thoughts, and we can accept part of that at times, what I'd like to suggest is a very simple premise going into what's going to be an extended exploration and investigation. I'm going to suggest that what's important to consider is not the content of each thought. It's impossible anyway. You cannot consider the content of thoughts. They come and they go. But I do want us to become ever so experienced and curious about asking the question, on whose behalf did the thought arrive? And that's much easier. There's only two possibilities to this question. On whose behalf did the thought arrive? Was it on behalf of the finite separate self or our true nature? And I'm going to give you a little way to frame a thought that might come in or arise on behalf of the separate self. It might be a thought around the resistance to what is. This resistance can take kind of two forms, let's say. I want or need such and such to happen or take place in order to be happy. Or I don't want what is present and need it to disappear in order to be happy. These two, desire and fear, are two sides of the same coin. And this is the apparent self. This is the finite self. This is the separate self. So investigate that. And I think that's a lot to ask you to do, but we're going to explore this because we've committed to the nature of self-care. So we have to define now, not just care. We've explored
But
care and
self.
humor, and we've explored the care of physicality and nutrition. Now we have to explore self. Because, okay, and to give it a frame so we don't get too out there again, these are the only two possibilities we're going to play with. So I'm going to suggest that we have the capacity, when thought arises on behalf of the separate self around a resistance to what is, what isn't, what I need, what I don't need, in this investigation or question, on whose behalf is this thought arising, you will find that there's no one there. So you can drop that thought. It's like you have an insta filtering system if we can ask the right question. It arises on behalf of, again, I'm going to say, this illusion. You can, my sister refers to this as the ultimate mind discernment, but we can practice this just a little bit. And you're going to notice how quickly thoughts fall away or cease arising. And it's a perfect plan that the reconnective healing experience is the breadth of how we're going to look at this, because you know, and actually I'm so glad that Wiggs, tell me your first name. You were on IG today, yes?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm Robert.
Robert, thank you so much, Robert. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So just Robert had a very sort of tangible experience today that in the midst of an kind of an interaction, the thoughts just disappeared. So we know that in a reconnective healing experience, the dissolving of otherness, this return to our true nature, this slow sort of lifting off of that obscuration of thinking dissolves. And sometimes our thoughts just vanish. So we can very easily investigate maybe thoughts that are arising practically from what we'll call our true nature. They're thoughts about truth and creativity. They're celebratory thoughts. You'll notice they are really of just this category, if you will. So as other thoughts cease to arise in feeling and perception of, do I want this or do I want that? The decision-making activity that might accompany, don't accompany the thought. I know this is a lot to digest, don't worry. So process, skills, steps, this part of the separate self has fallen away. And in a way, that approach to decision-making tends to fall away. That might include intuition. But thinking without thinking presents itself. This is innately woven into a reconnective healing experience. It's not something you have to learn how to do. It happens. And there is a diminishment of fear, anger, time, worthiness issues. Those decision-making activities that produce fear, anger, worthiness. Okay, so let's just be lost in a little of this. Don't worry. Next question, because this is something we're fed with tremendous concentration. Do your thoughts create the objective world? Write it down. Do your thoughts create the objective world? Important component in decision making when we're talking about self-care, and we're speaking specifically into our true nature. I'm going to suggest no, thoughts don't create the objective world. We are led to believe that thought and attention bring about whatever you're focused on. But I'm going to give you a good example of why that may not always be so. An animal or an infant has an experience of the objective world, but never has the experience of thinking about it being an objective world. Justin, I hope you're taking lots of notes, because you're not going to be on as a love leader later, but I am going to ask you to do a tremendous summary because I want your insights. So this is science, and this is also where we're heading. And don't worry, it's a lot. So think about it. Your animal at home. Julie, where's your cat? Come on, kitty. Right. So your cat has an experience of the objective world, but do you think that your beautiful cat is thinking about it being an objective world? No. Right. Okay. So it's possible, and here's now where you're all coming back to me, to have a perception of the world without having a thought about that world. Right? It's possible to have a perception. We've just explained. Infants have a perception of the world, but they don't have to have a thought about that world, an opinion, a perspective, right? So thoughts, thinking adds an interpretation to that perception. These are all parts of your decision making. So I'm walking you back because, believe it or not, you make decisions this way all the time. And so we want to sort of be considering what goes into decision making, really. So thoughts add an interpretation to our perception. We're all experiencing perception. That's what we do in our bodies, in our minds, right? That is experience. Perception is an experience. Thoughts interpret that perception and tells you that it's perception of an outside world. But that is not our actual experience, because the perception takes place in consciousness. Let me say that again. We know it's possible to have a perception of the world without having a thought about that world. Infants and animals do it all the time. Thoughts add an interpretation to that perception. And since we are all experiencing perception, perception is experience. Thoughts interpret that perception and tell us it's a perception of an outside world. But that is not our actual experience, because the perception takes place in consciousness. We explore this in reconnective healing sometimes when we do the holographic reconnective healing experience, when we ask you to use eyes. Scientifically, we're all staring at each other and we're in color and we're vibrant and we're right side up. And the article of your Oculus does not see anything in the way we perceive it. Perception is an experience. So Perception is a fact. The belief that it's a perception of an outside world is a concept or belief that thought adds to perception. Okay, so let me pull this in a little bit. We are taught through belief that the outside world that we are currently having a perception of is made out of stuff called matter. Okay? So we've got some layers here. This is not a fact of experience, it's an interpretation of an experience. This is scientifically known. The experience is the perception, the belief that the world is made out of matter. This is an interpretive, mainstream materialist paradigm. And it's one that your parents and some of us who are old enough, parents and grandparents, this is and has been their understanding. And we have inherited, as I told you very early on, many of the thoughts that we have are inherited. They are. We are being called in a reconnective healing experience to investigate, obviously, this mainstream materialistic paradigm and recognize it as an interpretation. Okay? Decision making. On whose behalf are you making the decision? So if we've completely bought into the belief that the world is made out of matter, even though it's not our experience, I experience a world outside consciousness made of matter. That's not our experience. We've been indoctrinated by culture to this perception. We start here in a reconnective healing experience with the same facts of experience that the materialist subscribes to, okay? Which is, in a reconnective healing experience, we begin with perception, right? Something tangible, we feel, right? And we're all experiencing perception, but we add a different interpretation to that experience that is consistent with our experience. It doesn't contradict our experience. Everything that takes place in consciousness is made of consciousness. We know this. That is our experience. So if we proceed slowly, we can stay very close to the evidence of experience, kind of very scientifically. Part of the portal asks you to move through this. Okay. So what does all this have to do with decision making? I want to look at the questions in the chat, because today, which is always the last LNL of the month, we have a piece of this devoted entirely to your Q&A. And again, don't worry about, we had a really vivid exercise at the beginning. This is going to continue into all of it. The whole nature of self-care is going to continue into the retreat this month. But let's look at the couple of questions in the chat. And then I love to see who's brave enough to maybe share your worst decision, your best decision. Was it made from intuition, or was it made through thinking without thinking? We would call thinking without thinking instinct.
Right. Except there is thinking and instinct.
Yes, but
But we call it thinking without thinking because we don't always realize that it's thoughts leading us a little bit away, shall we say, coloring, filtering, somewhat obscuring our knowingness. So
intuition or instinct?
Oh, I'm sorry. Intuition is that.
Intuition is thinking clouded.
My mouth sometimes confuses those two words. Anyway, Katharina asked, did I get that right? That decision-making activity doesn't accompany thoughts?
No.
No, I
Decision.
didn't think so.
Did you get that right?
Yeah. In other words, your impression of it was that you were saying that the decision-making process doesn't accompany.
The decision-making process doesn't necessarily accompany the
thoughts,
a perception of an outside world.
Right.
That's we're exploring decision-making, but in order to do that, I wanted to just sort of lift the top off of decision-making and look at the guts a bit of it, and how ultimately we need to be a little more discerning in our understanding of self. That's what we're exploring, the nature of self-care and decision-making. So we're looking at perception and belief and inherited thoughts, and we're asking on whose behalf did the thought arrive, which is a good question because there can only be two possibilities.
I see a very interesting comment from Robert. Would you like to share that, or would you like us to read it? But Robert, your comment is very interesting.
Okay, thank you. It's like, for me, it's like when I started to hear you, it resonates in me. Instead of focusing on fighting my thoughts, I start to change my perception. Because if I change my perception, it leads to new thoughts, and new thoughts to new realities. That's what I experience.
Yes. And to new experience and to new realities is, again, another relationship or a new experience. But I want you, Robert, I want you to just even take one step back, walk towards yourself even one further step. And the question might be, I'm trying to find the simplest way to say this. Thought interprets that perception and says it's a perception of an outside world. Okay?
Okay.
Is that your experience, or is that your perception?
I think it's my perception now.
Correct. And that's the nugget. That's the nugget. Perception is a belief. It's a concept or a belief that thinking adds to. And then the thought elaborates the belief, right? So we just have to kind of explore on whose behalf. We're not looking to dissect the nature of thoughts and perceptions, but if we can investigate on whose behalf, knowing what thought and perception are, the thought arose, then we can be very discerning about the decision. Yes, Justin, are you nodding? Can we help me? I want to frame, but yes, Robert, yes to everything.
And I actually love when Robert said, where it just moved for me, when Justin said, when I think about thinking, I run into myself and feel disconnected from knowing.
And this is absolutely what we're exploring.
Hey there, everyone. Dr. Eric here, and welcome to the second month of 2022, what we're referring to as the year of healing. What does the year of healing mean to you? Well, let me share a little bit about what it means to me. So it's a revealing, it's an unveiling, it's the recognition that we are all one. When one of us receives, we all receive. The people we love, the people we think we love, the people we like, the people we're not so sure we like, the people we're absolutely certain we don't like. Everyone receives, because as love, as oneness, as unity, we just simply are. So we'll be exploring many different exciting concepts this year, and we're bringing you the LIF courses, Living in the Frequencies. As well, there'll be exciting new YouTube premieres. So to find out more about this year of healing, look down below. There's a link. Click on it.
And let's go back up to the top, because now we've gone way out, because we want to welcome in experience and questions and things about this. Decision making for most of us is perceived to be obtained through thinking. So really at the belly of it, is there free will? Are we a victim to our thoughts? See, these are the things that cause us to make all different kinds of decisions that are not rooted in self-care. They're not on behalf of creativity, loving intelligence. So when, sort of in the core of it, at the centerpiece, when we are able to answer the question on whose behalf has that thought arose, and to know thyself, then whether the decision we made yielded the right outcome, the wrong outcome, never enters into our perception. It doesn't enter into happiness, our joy. It was the best decision given all of our knowingness available. And so we're no longer focused on, again, the equation of the separate self, which always will be framed with some component, and I'm going to, don't resistance, but let me qualify. I need to qualify resistance. The resistance to what is. The resistance to wants or needs, such as something needing to take place in a particular way in order to be happy. Okay. So anyway, these are the sort of nuances here. We're going to get, this is going to come so seamlessly. Can we, yes? I want to explore the bravery of some of you to, is Anna, are you on this call with us? She's probably doing lots of things behind the scenes, but in the retreat, I'm going to ask Anna to join us because she had a very good example of this from the perspective of something health related, on whose behalf. So many ways we can look at it, but yes.
Christy wrote in, she said, Don Miguel Ruiz wrote several great books relating to these. concepts, the actor, the mastery of love, the voice of knowledge, the three questions, all of them about how our beliefs came from learning from others who taught us as children. When we become old enough, we realize this, and then we can choose to create our own decisions based on our own heart guidance.
Okay. And I know that we're still wanting to just focus on the process of decision making. And yes, we can do that. And we do that. And we would say that's our emotional evolution. And it's all part of a variety of different ways we are taught to have an experience of happiness. I want us to go to the before, the beyond experience. I want us to investigate our true nature, which is happiness. And so I'm not really fully asking you to analyze or move through decision making and how do we make decisions, but to explore knowing oneself, fulfillment, peace, happiness, joy, by looking at the nature of decision making or decision making. So we're good. Yes to all of that. I would love a couple of you to bravely share, because I think in the sharing, some of this is going to just dissect itself. Does anybody want to share a little about what you wrote down?
And I think that
Both
some of the
parts.
sharing really we gain so much from, because sometimes it's easy to talk about, and it's not that these aren't with value, they're with great value, what others have written about in books, but then again, we are sharing other people's teachings that we're evaluating and incorporating, and in ways repeating, because we recognize their value and their position. But when we're sharing what's coming from us from the inside, I think we've got some of the greatest potential for our own discovery and growth.
Agreed.
Yes, we have Lucy willing to share. Lucy, please unmute.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You're unmuted.
Yeah, okay. So would you like to know what my worst decision or my, and my best?
I want to know, we want to share three parts, worst or best, whichever you want to start with. And also in hindsight, do you think that either or both were made with intuition or thinking without thinking? So just share.
Right. As long as your worst decision wasn't to unmute.
Yeah, I could. So I'll start with my worst. To me, my worst decision was to do drugs when I was younger, just to be one of the crowd. And I definitely was not thinking, obviously. Well, to me, that was obvious now.
Okay. And you say you weren't thinking. Okay.
I don't
That's
believe
your-
I was, no.
In hindsight, you would say you weren't thinking. Okay.
Do you want to know my best now?
Well, no, because again, that would suggest that led you weren't thinking. So that's what led you to make this worst decision. And that's how we're taught, right? This is the paradigm of how we're taught. So keep going. Yep. We're going to explore the paradigm of the finite self. This is exactly how it's served up to us.
Yeah,
Which means
thank you.
also, I just want to add to it that had you been thinking, your thoughts reflected to you as matter would have looked different, felt different, been different. You're meaning right? The matter of your environment or your friend, all the stuff, right? Okay.
Right. So my best decision was to keep my pregnancy. I was also young at the time. And I believe that I made through intuition.
Tell me how you made the decision to keep your baby through intuition. Tell me what you recall and why you're saying that you made it from intuition.
Okay, because I went through a lot of decision making thoughts of should I, shouldn't I? And then something happened to me. I was attacked. And when I remember when it was happening, I thought, if I come through this and I don't miscarry the baby, I'm going to keep her because I believe that this was a sign for me to know the decision.
Okay. So an incident occurred, and in that instant, and I'm going to ask you something really granular here, was this question that you were having in hindsight after the attack, or was it during this attack that this idea of your pregnancy or keeping it or not keeping it came up? Do you recall?
So before, I'm not sure I understood the question, but before I was attacked, I was trying to figure out, should I keep this baby or not?
Mhm.
And I just couldn't make a decision. I had lots of pros, lots of cons. But once I was attacked, I remember clearly thinking that this was my decision right there. I wanted to keep this baby if I survive not miscarrying. I felt that it was a sign for me. Whether it was or not, I don't know, but I think it was.
So here's my take on this just a little bit. When you were thinking about it, the more you were thinking, the more confused maybe you became, the more obscured you were to your inner knowingness. I think
Absolutely.
that during the attack, you were not simultaneously going, so do I keep the baby or don't I? During your attack, you weren't in thought, you weren't even trying to follow your instinct. An opening for your knowingness to appear showed up. Now,
Yeah.
we can say, so I thought I made this decision there. I think maybe sort of what happens is that you tuned in unmistakably to the knowingness that you always had, but was being hidden by the thought making, decision making process, building on top of the building, on top of the building, on top of the building. And in a sense, I don't quite want to say it this way, but let's just sort of imagine maybe part of that attack was part of a bigger design to allow you that moment of clarity to
Absolutely.
bring forward a life.
Okay, I love the imagery and the creativity. I'm going to pull you, Dr. Eric, and you, beautiful Lucille, in. I am asking you a very straight question. On whose behalf did the decision to keep the baby arise?
I think on mine.
No,
On
on the
my
separate,
behalf.
on the separate self, or on your true nature?
Well, I can only say I think on my true nature.
Yes, and the investigation is going to be how you know the difference, because we don't need to create an attack in
Right.
order for us to
Of
be
course.
No,
aware. And this is a very interesting example that we would call lessons in our life. We may be evolving beyond. The idea of the human experience may be evolving to where it isn't reliant on there being a cataclysmic event in order for the true self to make a decision on behalf of the true self.
and it isn't. It's sometimes do we drive ourselves crazy to a point where we make a choice for something like that, but we never really have to.
Most aha moments and the neuroscience in the last 10 years spent a lot of time really exploring consciousness. Most will say mystical events are happening out of a cataclysmic or on the edge event. So we know this, but this group of friends, we are here and committed to the ethos of healing is just that simple.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be with cataclysmic. Sometimes that may have been who we were to make those choices because we might not have known another way that we allowed ourselves to recognize. And part of the problem that comes along with talking about it that way is some of us tend to think, well, I guess that's the only way I'll get to my answer. And really the gift in this is knowing that that is not a way we need to take. So on whose behalf of this? Was it on the behalf of the finite self or the only true self? And sometimes maybe was the thought process of the finite self interfering with us tuning into, becoming aware of the finite self, knowingness.
And we can't jump too fast into this. So we're going to just, but first of all, I am in such gratitude for the intimacy of your share.
Yes, definitely.
I must tell you, to speak about the heart and to be in a group of people that I would say you need nothing from, but you're absolutely in love with, is such, it is why the RLC is so important to us. So thank you.
And I really think that most everyone here is in gratitude, Lucy, for that share. I really do.
And Lucy, I would love you to look at the nature of the same question and bring it to something maybe that happened today or last week. Bring it into this very small so that you can continue to practice on whose behalf that decision was made. And let's see where that simple falling away, once we know on whose behalf a thought arises, again, the separate self doesn't really have a lot of thoughts that arise on its behalf. And life becomes so fascinatingly joy. Okay. So life experience is called life experience for a reason. We've given it a story that's kept us very busy. So that's all we're exploring. We're exploring a little more simplicity around it. Okay. Anybody else want to share? We have just a few minutes anyway.
Yes, we do have a couple of hands still. Thank you so much, Lucy. Thank you. Lisa, please unmute. Lisa?
Hi. I don't know what I can add to that. Just, I had a similar experience. My worst decision was meeting a man for dinner, and the outcome of the dinner was really, really unpleasant. But my question is really, if I look back at that, making that decision, there were little red flags, that there were little doubts in my mind coming up to that dinner, and I was 18. I'm just like, oh, never mind, it'll be fine. Just if I'd known about instinct, if I'd known about making decision, looking at it from a bigger picture, then would it have been different? But also, well, yes, of course it would. But also, if we choose certain events to happen in this lifetime, would I have made a different decision? Probably not, if that was meant to happen in this lifetime, which is a different question. But.
Okay, yes, and it's a question that we rose today very directly. And some of you had an interesting look on your face. So let me read it to you again. Do we believe that we are victims of random thoughts creating the world for us? So the beautiful question that you're, or investigation that you're bringing up, Lisa, and I want to know what your best decision was. Yes, that's a beautiful one too, because you want to allow the question underneath it, on whose behalf is this decision arising. Again, when we have little red flags that come up, we get to recognize right there, the separate self is approaching the scenario from the perspective of, is this what I want or I don't want, right? It's already obscured. And that's how we're trained. That's how the materialistic world is shaped for us. We are, and there's this world out there. So a lot of these adjustments, and they come through these kind of exercises or questions. So what was the best decision?
But wait, right before we go there. And when we talk about the best or the worst decisions, we immediately go to the biggest ones, the ones that stand out in our memories. But the little ones are important too. What if I got up from my chair and went right instead of left, and I twisted my ankle and had to go to the hospital and ended up getting an introduction into a great group of people that wouldn't have happened if I went in the other direction? It's so little. What if I had selected someone else from an audience to do a demo on when I was teaching instead of the person that was there with Jillian, that we never would have met, and all of this would have gone somewhere else. But those are tiny little things. I could have gone you instead of you and pointed to another person, and there would have been a huge directional change. So sometimes when we go, I wouldn't have made that choice. It's a little interesting of a question, because it's really virtually impossible for us to see and envision the entire cascade of effects from the smallest decisions as well as the largest.
It's possible to have a perception of the world without having a thought about that world.
Right.
We really, we're going to get granular too quickly. Let's stay very expansive. I know that healing for you, Lisa and Lucy, comes in the hindsight, in the experience. Is it absolutely necessary for the flourishing of happiness to know thyself that we have these great I'm going to say experiences of separateness from our true self? We definitely know that we don't and are not required to eliminate our true self in order to have experience. That's the really good news. Experience isn't dependent upon approval of our true nature, right? So we don't have to ever worry that all these random synchronicities we would miss out on if, right? Is that you following that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we want to go to the best.
Can I just say that my best decision was going to an I Can Do It conference and meeting Dr. Eric and Jillian. Well, I didn't meet Jillian because she was off hugging everybody. But I got my book and I said to Dr. Eric, why do you reconnective healing over Reiki? And that was it. So thank you.
Love you so
Thank
much.
you.
So thank you. That's really beautiful to be included in, especially around this topic today, the nature of self-care and decision-making. That is, for me, why I want to continue to be a part of this conversation together. Like, this is why. Yeah, thank you.
And it really is, I'm watching, glancing through some of the comments as they fly so quickly by it. One is the comment about enjoying so much the line of questioning. I think, and you've heard me say this, and I'll continue to say it, I think oftentimes the questioning is far more empowering than just what we come up with as the answer, because the answer may change as our, to use this word, perspective changes, but the questioning allows us to explore and grow and evolve so much
Investigate.
beyond the investigation, beyond just what, coming up with going, that's the answer next.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We have time for one more. We have one more hand. Please, Katharina, please unmute.
Oh, I so love these shares. Well, for me, it was difficult to even put down the best and worst decision, because I feel that for a long time, all the, let's call it big decisions, haven't really been decisions. So when I use the word decision, it implies like the mental choice, thoughts, pros and cons. So this rational decision. And that's how I used to go about it when I was young. So everything was about science and understanding. And so I had this list of all the qualities I wanted in a partner, and I chose my partners with this list, and each and every relationship was horrific because they weren't right for me, but the criteria were fulfilled. So at some point I just decided, okay, the list can't be it. And that was about the point when I tried to find a different way of decision making. And then for a long time I strove to be enlightened. And so what I did was to let go of thoughts and belief systems. And by doing that, I recognized that any thought or any belief system is just something that we like buy into, and then it becomes what we consider, it's our story, it becomes what we consider real. And so, but really, like with this question, on whose behalf did this thought arrive? For me, on no one's, it just arrives. It's there. And so for like big decisions, or really for even now for the smaller ones, I just feel it in my body. Or for example, the other way around, I decided that I didn't want to live in Spain many years ago. That was decided in my mind, and I kept living in Spain, and I rejected the experience for so long, and that decision was made. But then at some point, the decision occurred. And when that happened, it was so easy to move all the pieces. It just happened. So I think, at what point was their decision? It decided. And I think of it as witnessing the thoughts that come along with the decision that does not originate in this person, brain, individual, but in something bigger.
It's not a thinking process, really, when we are no longer in the resistance of a decision being centered around I want or I need such and such to happen in order to be that I am. Happiness. And this is really what we're going to delve into exploring more and more around, being in recognition of the materialist world, and also being thoroughly clear that it is not a fact of experience, it's an interpretation of an experience that matter is and becomes perceptible. That if we know anything in this 21st century, it's that everything takes place in consciousness and is made of consciousness. And so oneness has no separation. Consciousness is infinite. It can't become something that it already is.
And checklists for qualities you want are really separation just by the fact of the different numbers of bullet points, and the announcement that it isn't here yet, but this is what you want I have found that relationships, I'll say business relationships and employees and personal relationships, when they have fulfilled a checklist, have not turned out to be my optimal ones. It's when something inside of me goes, that's it. And then someone say, well, but do they fit this? Do they fit that?
What's the
I said,
something inside of
I
you,
don't,
honey?
no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. When I don't know. When I know the I, whatever we define the I, when I'm in knowingness, that's the one.
On whose
Then
behalf you're
that's
making the
right,
decision.
right.
Yes.
And when someone says to me, but are they this, are they that, or why? I can't always answer why, because the whys have not really led me to where I was going. And the knowingness in those few moments have.
So practical, is that, what is that?
That's you.
Oh,
That was an example. I could not have done a list. I wasn't looking. I couldn't say I want someone who looks like this and sounds like this and thinks like this and that. No,
I'm
was
not
just
just
a
the stuff that
knowingness.
matter is created out of, that you thought up. We're really now in trouble. So these are
no,
these are,
that's a way of saying I'm really now in trouble.
no, it's not. It's so
okay,
beautiful.
good. Okay.
And I will listen. We are exploring a conversation, and we're exploring a lot of ways again to explore on what's underneath our decisions. I do want to be very thoughtful in thinking to say that I am not suggesting that our thoughts are not impacting greatly all experience. They are. Our thoughts are impacting unilaterally our experience. So instead of just committing to a new series of thoughts, this is where we are doing a little more playful investigation and seeing what the tenets of on whose behalf a decision is made, or is thinking at the centerpiece of decision making, which again, I think most of us would say it couldn't be. Thinking couldn't be at the centerpiece of decision making. And that's a huge thing to swim around in. So we're going to swim.
Especially when we think that it is.
So there's a lot to explore here. The beautiful part is that's we're going to just, that's why we're here. And we want the conversation to expand. And we have this social media, so Facebook, we're sorry that it's rooted in here. And I know some of you just don't like social media. And I don't know, we may be responsible for coming up through even the decision-making that we're exploring here with a new way, but we have to find a platform for you guys to just express and share. And so please go to the RLC private Facebook group. Know that it is really private. Private means what you share there is only the privilege of those that are committed to gather as this group of friends, again, who don't need anything from one another, but are madly in love. So.
Beautiful.
BC, how are you?
Oh, we are already past time, but since we're already past time, you had mentioned before you wanted to have Justin share something, and he wrote something in the chat just recently. I wanted to let him share on this. So Justin, I'm going to read it, then you get to share. Our thinking is so limited that I prefer to see thoughts as clouds in the sky. They will always be moving, but we can entertain them briefly and continue to enjoy the background cosmos and entire universe beyond them.
I hope your share is as good as your face just was a second ago.
Oh, you forgot about me. So we were doing.
So completely appreciate that poetry and truth. and the knowing, you know, when we share from loving intelligence in this forum, there's just the process that is coming in great scope, that has arrived in great scope, brings about unending joy. Love that is love itself. Yeah. Anyway, Justin, thank you. Thank all of you. We were really looking to how to bring this part of the conversation into our forum, and so we've begun it, and we're gonna explore it a little more deeply again on June 4th in the retreat with some meditation and also your breakout sessions with each other, and
in some of our live retreats too. I mean, even in the Catalyst in New York, it was so much fun.
Have a beautiful week. We'll see you all soon. Mwah. Love you.